Hello, friends, and welcome back to Dare Me to Prosper. My name is Avery, and I'm your host, and this is episode 28, and we're talking about grief today. I have said this many times on the podcast, but I feel like, don't just feel like, I know that 2025 is a difficult, transformational, catalyst year for many, many people. Heck, for countries. 2025 is just a very volatile year in general, astrologically, personally, on all sorts of levels. This year is really about change for a lot of people, and a lot of people are going through, karmic endings and new beginnings and just really deep transformative times in their life. For me especially, like I said, I've mentioned I'm very freshly going through a divorce. Like, this is also a very transformational year for me as well. So no matter what you are going through, I'm going to guess that there's something happening in your life that is difficult, transformational, but maybe very hard. But regardless, I think many of us, if not most of us, have also all known grief before, whether you lost a loved one or whether you have grieved a relationship or are grieving a relationship, or it could be all sorts of things. I definitely do not intend to compare levels of grief, whether your grief is very deep or just under the surface. It's not about justifying your grief, but rather just acknowledging that grief comes in many depths, many different ways, looks different for different people. People process it differently. But I want to talk about the purpose of grief and how to get through it in a healthy way spiritually, and also kind of the before and after of how you can look at grief as a stepping stone and as a transformational point in your life rather than just something you have to deal with. So really quick though, before we get started, I just want to remind you to please leave a review if you haven't already. My voice went really high there. Also a reminder that I do offer personal psychic sessions. In these sessions, I am basically acting as the go-between between you and spirit, especially if there is something that you feel like you're having trouble getting guidance on, or you want to connect with specific answers, you have specific questions. My personal giftings really lead me to helping people understand their greater purpose, helping people understand their path, and anything that goes along with that, anything that helps them get there. What tends to come through for me often is basically information and encouragement from spirit about here's what's blocking you, here's maybe what you need to focus on more, here's what's going on. I will take any question that you have to spirit, but especially for those of you who are really needing guidance on your next steps or where you're going in life or what you should be focusing on, or maybe what's blocking you, what relationships maybe you need to keep or let go of. All of those sorts of things are really my wheelhouse. So if that is you, I offer personal sessions for $44. They will not always be $44, but that is where they are right now because I really wanted this to be easily accessible. So there is a link to the show notes if you feel called or nudged by spirit to seek out some clarity or some more guidance. That is for you. Also, I recently launched a Patreon channel. There are 2 tiers. There is one tier at $5 a month where you get an extra episode every week. So far I have launched an episode about my very fresh divorce and all the ins and outs of what that experience has been like, what I experienced prior to deciding on divorce and after the fact and all of that. And then there's also an episode where my sister and I had a really great conversation about infertility, specifically her infertility journey and how she kind of released the energy that she needed to release and kind of her journey in getting pregnant. And now she has 2 beautiful daughters that she has birthed. And so I felt like that was also a really important conversation. So anyway, the $5 tier, you also get access to ask questions in Q&A episodes, as well as early access to the regular episodes. There's also a second tier for $22 a month, which is more of like a monthly membership feeling in terms of we're going to be on group calls. I'm going to do a group live channeling every month, a live teaching every month. That is much more like connecting with me and connecting with a group of people who are like-minded. I will also do a free free reading or give away a free psychic reading every month, and I will raffle that off to one of the members, as well as, of course, access to the extra episodes that you would get in Tier 1 as well. So if you are somebody that really has been connecting with me on this podcast, enjoying the podcast, really wants to dive into your growth, your personal growth, your healing journey, and you're serious about that this year, especially in a year like 2025, these are for you. This is definitely for the woman who is ready to really take things seriously, to step into her own power, to deepen her spiritual journey. Not to sound cliche, but genuinely change your life, because these little things, taking the little steps, getting little answers, are genuinely what add up to big life changes. And I can attest to that in my own life for sure. So you will know if that is for you, and I'm excited to connect with those of you that want to take it a step further. All right, let's talk about grief. Understanding the purpose and what grief really is from a spiritual perspective. A lot of times when you hear the word grief, you just think of oftentimes somebody dying or passing away, losing a loved one, because as humans, of course, that feels like the deepest form of grief. That being said, again, we're not comparing grief here, because you can also grieve a job that you left. You can also grieve a home. Grief is the loss of something that causes sadness on a very basic level. But really, from a spiritual perspective, it's much deeper than that. It's a powerful, energetic, and soul process. And so instead of thinking of grief as something that you just have to feel, that's kind of like a byproduct of something happening, I want us to think of grief as a process. Grief is an emotion that really breaks your ego open for a purpose. Grief is not just about mourning something or losing something. It's literally about shedding an old version of yourself that no longer matches the new reality that you are stepping into. Now, I'm going to talk about a lot, trigger warning, I'm going to talk about a lot how grief is this transformative process, and it's a lot about letting go. If you have lost a loved one, I don't want you to think that I'm saying you need to let go of that person. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about transforming and letting go of an old version of you that still needed to process the grief. So when I'm talking about letting go, I don't want you to get upset and feel like I'm telling you to let go of a loved one. That's not the same thing. So yes, you grieve when you release something or have to let go of something. But the relief, the way it's processed in your body, comes out as sadness, powerlessness. Genuinely, some of the lowest emotions that you can feel are feelings like grief. So they're very low vibrational. They're very difficult, deep emotions, which of course you probably know. What you may not know is that the reason it's so important to process grief, even if you think you've processed it, a lot of people will like partially process it, or they think that just because they've experienced sadness that they've processed all of their grief, and that's not always the case. And oftentimes, a lot of that grief can get stuck in our body, and it will not be a kind guest. So if there is any part of you that has resisted feeling that grief or processing that grief in full, there will be grief, the energy of grief, stuck and kind of locked into your body. So on an energetic level, kind of what happens, grief, when it comes in, it kind of creates an energetic void. Like the loss of something, that grief that breaks you open, it creates this void in your system, right? This energetic void of something you have lost, and now you are grieving the loss of that. So picture almost like a portal opening. All of a sudden there's this gaping hole, and you're grieving the loss of whatever was there. However, I want you to think of that same opening that now feels empty as an opportunity for transformation. Now we're going to move through that portal, move through that gaping hole to a new version of ourselves as we process the grief, as we move through it. We're going to move from an old version to a new version of ourselves. And again, hear me, I'm not trying to glamorize grief. It is insanely difficult and deep and traumatic. Okay, so it's not that I'm trying to like put grief on a pedestal and make it like a self-help book. I'm not. At the same time, grief does have a spiritual purpose. Think of a phoenix rising from the ashes, right? We've all heard that phrase. The grief is the phoenix being burned to ashes coming out of the grief on the other side, as hard as it was and as much as it changed you and as much as you might still, long for what you once had, there's a different version of you now on the other side. It's a different bird that has risen from the ashes, no longer able to go back to the previous version. The things that hurt are often the same things that humble us into a deeper alignment. Grief is a strong force that knocks us down, but it gives you the opportunity to come back stronger, to come back more evolved. Again, not to minimize it, from a spiritual perspective, grief is almost like a spiritual boot camp where your soul has taken on a really difficult challenge, a challenge that not everyone is or has been able to handle. But if you're strong enough, if you are willing to sit in the pain, to sit in the hurt, to transmute it, to process it, you will come out stronger, more evolved, more spiritually developed on the other side of that. There are certainly people who crumble under the weight of grief, and we don't blame them for it. I'm not judging those people. It is so hard in a world that is already so hard, in lives that are already so hard. So we don't blame people for crumbling underneath it. However, if you are someone who embodies a lot of strength, which I assume you are if you're here listening to this, if you fully process the grief, you will come out a much more aligned, evolved version of yourself. Grief is basically a tool that clears out attachments, it clears out illusions, it clears out control, and it makes room for more aligned things like surrender and trust and a deeper connection to spirit. It's like a cleansing. It's like a spiritual cleansing where that grief and that letting go is you detaching from an old identity. So again, it could be loss of a loved one, but it could also be the end of a relationship. It could be a life transition. It could be leaving behind an old belief system. All of these things, anytime you are detaching from something or leaving something behind that was a big part of your life, it can be difficult to fully detach. It can be difficult to let go of that version of you, that version of your life that you were so attached to. And different people process it differently. It doesn't always look like crying. Sometimes it can show up as numbness, as anger, confusion. It can show up as a spiritual awakening where all of a sudden, all of your old beliefs fall away and you look at life a completely different way. But the same way that fire transforms metal into something stronger, like being forged by iron or iron forged in the fire. What is the phrase? I never get that right. The point is, grief alchemizes pain into wisdom. Like your soul is going through the fire. Your soul is going through a kiln where your energy is purified, where you are releasing grief. You're releasing this old version of you, these old wounds that you have. And I know that if you are not somebody that is used to doing the inner work or processing emotions, all of this can sound very abstract, and it sounds very kind of hard to grasp. I understand that we're kind of dancing around these very airy topics, but this is where the life changes happen. They don't happen on the outside. They happen on the inside. They happen in your mind, in your heart, in your energy. When you change inside, that's when the outside of your life changes. And so many people try to skip over this part. They try to skip over the grieving. They try to skip over the inner work. And then they wonder why their life looks exactly the same, or why they keep running into the same problems over and over. They keep having to learn the same lessons over and over, or they just can't get past this or that or whatever. It's because they don't want to do the inner work. And even though this can, again, be a really weird, deep topic, this is what matters. This is the difference between your old life and your new life. This is the version of you that reaches the highest, most aligned version of yourself, and the version of you that doesn't. This is the difference between your lowest timeline and your highest timeline, is doing this work inside of yourself. I also want to mention, sometimes grief can be inherited, okay? So you've heard of passing down, say, generational trauma, okay? The same thing can happen with grief. Grief can be passed down. There is an ancestral link spiritually between you and your entire bloodline, essentially. We have soul relationships where we might not be directly blood related, but we are family on a soul level. But then we've also got the physical bloodline ancestral connections with our ancestors, where from body to body, from their energy and then pass down to us, you can pass on grief, inherited trauma, inherited karmic cycles. You wonder why so many things run in families. It's not just because you witnessed it in childhood. Oftentimes, negative cycles can replicate in families because they are passing down this trauma, passing down this energy until somebody can transmute it. It's like maybe your grandmother tried to break this ancestral trauma and she couldn't do it. So she passed it down to her daughter and she couldn't quite do it either. She tried, and now it's being passed to you. And now you have the opportunity to break a cycle for your entire ancestral line. And so the way that grief comes in there is if you are able to do that, you can release grief over something that not just for you, but for your grandmother, for your great-grandmother, or your grandfather. I mean, it could be anybody. I'm just using women as an example. Say you left a toxic relationship and that was a pattern in your family and your grandmother was never able to do that. Your great-grandmother was never able to do that, but you did. You just broke a karmic chain for your entire ancestral line, and now you're grieving not only what you went through and the loss of your relationship, but also you're grieving on behalf of your grandmother and your great-grandmother or whatever it is. And regardless of the cause of grief, when grief happens, it will awaken dormant parts that sit in your body. So again, it's like opening up a portal, right? Because you're losing something. You have this gaping hole. I almost think of it as actually that doesn't necessarily make sense. I was going to say I almost think of it as like the placenta detaching from a womb. And then once that detaches, you have a baby. I don't know if that's a good example, but the point is that the release of something through grief brings in the birth of something new. And so when that happens, things can come to the surface that may not have been able to come to the surface before. It's like your grief cracks the ceiling, and all of a sudden now there's a little bit more room for the compassion, for the courage, for the intuition to be brought to the surface. It pushes people to finally be able to connect to their inner guidance because the external world is no longer resonating. It no longer feels safe. It no longer feels certain. It forces people to go inside and to seek what's inside of themselves instead of leaning so much on the outside, which is why, as awful and as heartbreaking and as traumatic as it is for someone to lose a loved one, this is why you often see that after those things happen, people who are grieving become more sensitive to signs, to dreams, to synchronicities. They become more attuned to the subtle presence of spirit, of their guides, of their loved ones, of their higher self. You're more emotionally and energetically porous because now you're tuned in. Now, through the excruciating loss of something, I really am leaning a lot using like the loss of a loved one here, but it doesn't need to be that. I'm just using the most extreme example, but it works this way whether it's a loved one or not. Like, let's say you're grieving a relationship, okay? Same thing goes. Your outer world has become unstable, has become painful, and so you go in. The grief on the outside feels like it's cracking you open because it is, so you go in. You go in and you search for guidance on the inside. You try to connect with God, to connect with spirit. You try to pray. Anytime something scary happens, it forces us to go inward, which is why so often our souls will allow us or agree to go through these experiences during our lifetime, is because they know that as hard as it is, how transformative this process becomes. And so people often start hearing their intuition, or they start having that spiritual awakening. They start unveiling their spiritual gifts after deep grief. And that's because the walls came down. So instead of resisting grief or trying to bypass it, think of inviting it in like a guest, which I know sounds insane because grief is such a hard emotion to deal with. But if you push it away, if you resist, all you're going to do is get that grief stuck in your body, where, again, it's not going to be a fun guest. It's not going to be nice to just have around when you ignore it. Think of it as a guest who's here to meet you in your sadness and help you out of it. Think of grief as something that is here to help you process your sadness. Think of it like, here comes the grief. What is the grief here to teach me? What parts of me is this grief asking me to see, asking me to deal with? So spiritually, grief becomes like a teacher in disguise, bringing up old wounds for you to look at and to process and to figure out what is left inside you that has not been handled. And so speaking of grief being stuck in the body, right? Because it's not just mental, it's not just emotional, it's physical. It lives in your chest, it lives in your jaw, in your gut, in your shoulders. I want to talk really quick about how if you feel like this is you, how do you get the grief out? How do you process it? Besides feeling it, not running away from the feelings, feeling the grief, allowing yourself to be like, I feel incredibly sad and hopeless and distraught, or whatever it is, angry. So yes, feeling, but also there's physical things that you can do. Go ground your bare feet on the earth. Deep breath work, right? Breathing into your lower belly. Movement, walking, swimming, stretching, shaking, dancing, literally anything that just gets your body intentionally moving. Water, so just taking baths, taking showers, swimming. Water is a great cleanser. Again, something that people don't think of. Ask your spirit team, ask your guides, ask your angels, ask your ancestors, ask for assistance. You always have assistance available to you. All you have to do is ask. You have free will, meaning that the spiritual realm does not have permission to just come in and do whatever they want, even if they feel like it's something you would need. You've got to ask for it. Ask for help. Show me how I can process this grief. Help me lighten this load. Help me figure out how to release what I need to release. Some things to look for, key symptoms of grief being held in your body. Physically, it might be like a constant tightness in your chest, in your throat, shallow breathing, just like not being able to catch your breath. Again, this is disclaimer. I'm not a doctor. If you feel like you have actual medical physical needs, go to the doctor. This is just how grief could be showing up in the body. Fatigue, a lot of fatigue or heaviness in the body, aching shoulders, aching neck, digestive issues, random crying spells, emotional numbness, mental fog, forgetfulness, apathy. If you think about a lot of these, it really makes sense. Like, what do you think happens if energy gets stuck in your body? If you were to think of a ball of energy, right, that's supposed to be moving around your body, or energy in general that's moving around your body, and it gets stuck, like, what do you think that would feel like? It makes perfect sense, at least in my mind, that it feels like, oh, there's an ache in my shoulder. Oh, there's a knot in my chest. There's a knot in my throat. I have mental fog. All of these things, when you think about it, really come down to like something being blocked. The energy is stuck, it's blocked, and so when energy gets blocked, things can't move correctly. You can't think your thoughts. You can't catch your breath. Your muscles can't relax. All of these symptoms are similar in that they all kind of point to blocked energy. This could also, I feel like I should have brought this up earlier, but this could also really relate to childhood trauma. So this is something that I have been focused on like the past few years, not as so much recently, but childhood trauma, that kind of grief, that kind of those old emotions that get stuck in your body because you didn't process them because either, you probably just didn't know how to because you were a child. Also, just because it can be really scary and you may not know, you may push these feelings down, push them away, again, as a child because it feels really big, feels really scary. You don't know what to do with all these emotions. All that childhood trauma type of grief can also create these kinds of blocks in your body, in your life. And so think of that as well. Like there's all sorts of different ways that grief or those same energetic emotions as grief can be stuck or stored in your body. And so spiritually, grief is not a detour. It's part of the path. It's like a threshold between who you were and who you're becoming. So when something dies, when something is released, a relationship, a dream, a role, a person, you are now being invited into this grief process of identity change. Also, and I remember, I have mentioned before the past life hypnotherapist that I've seen in a session, and I need to have her on the podcast. But she really, and we talked about this in my session, and I think she's talked about this before. She is someone who, and she shares this, but she talked about the loss of her daughter. And it's such a, obviously, anytime you hear that someone has lost a child, it's like, it just hits you in the gut because that's like one of the worst experiences any of us can imagine having. She, being a spiritual teacher herself, has walked through this and really, I don't want to speak for her, but she seems to really use this experience to help people understand attachments and how, from a spiritual standpoint, one of the most kind of evolved perspectives that you can take on is non-attachment. Basically recognizing that you are just here for a moment, for a blink. Spiritually speaking, again, this is just one movie. You're like an actor who comes into lifetime after lifetime playing movie after movie after movie. This is just one of those movies. And so recognizing that you can love people, you can love things, you can love experiences, but at the end of the day, there is no separation because we're all connected energetically, spiritually. And so I actually remember her kind of using this as an example, talking to me about, like, I was asking questions about, like, are my kids going to be okay and this and that. And she kind of used that moment talking to me to be like, do you not trust spirit? Like, do you not trust the universe? Do you not trust your children's higher selves to know, what's best for them? And, every mother would be lying if she said she didn't care or that she was completely detached, from like the outcome of what happens to her children. But it was just a moment. It was an opportunity. It was an invitation to step back and say, ultimately, I know that all things will be okay, that nothing is ever permanently gone, that spirit lives forever, and there is no true loss. There is no true detachment. And she, who has been through what she's been through, I feel like can actually say this to people. And that's such an uncomfortable thought. And I like genuinely, for the record, I think my children are going to be fine. I don't necessarily think that's something that, she wasn't trying to like prepare me for anything. It was just an opportunity to recognize the greater spiritual purpose behind attachments and trust. From the universe's perspective, grief's higher purpose is to burn away attachments. Attachments to how you thought your life would go, attachments to who you thought you would be or what you thought you would have forever. Grief is not a punishment, but when you lose an attachment to something, you can't carry that attachment into your next evolution. Like, grief is the process of letting go of that attachment to ensure that this new person that you're becoming doesn't bring in this old energy. I read this quote that says, grief is the fire that empties your hands so that spirit can fill them, right? It's just kind of another picture. I always go back to the phoenix rising from the ashes. Grief is the fire that burns the bird to the ground, that burns the phoenix to the ground. And your evolution and how you handle that grief is the bird being born from the ashes. It burned not because it failed, not because the bird did anything wrong, not because something was lost by mistake, but because it was time for a new evolution. It was time for something new. The bird willingly enters the fire knowing that it's going to burn, knowing that in order to become the next version of itself, it has to burn away what is no longer aligned, or it can never become that next version. And then the next version, as it's reborn, is stronger, wiser, more powerful than before. And that's what grief feels like, right? That's what grief does to us. It feels like we're being burned down to nothing. Grief feels like you're being burned to the ground. And like everything that you knew is gone. Your identity, your connection, the plan that you had for your life, whether you're leaving an old relationship or a job or a person, whatever it is. But what's really happening, even though it feels like your whole life is gone, what's really happening is your soul is shedding its old form to become something more aligned with your ultimate truth, with your ultimate soul, with who you really are. It doesn't mean that if you have lost a person, that person is gone or that you're detaching from that person. It's just the old version of yourself that was attached to a certain way of thinking, a certain expectation for your life. Does that make sense? So to wrap up this episode, I want to talk about like navigating grief and actual practical and spiritual tools that you can use to get through the process, because going through grief is hell. I don't want to like present this episode as if working through grief is just some easy thing to do. Of course it's not. What I really wanted to do with this episode was present a new perspective around grief. But moving through grief is, of course, hard as hell. And I'm not encouraging you to rush the process. Grief can take years. But if you slow down and you don't try to resist or skip over the hard parts, that's where the healing comes in. Grief wants to be witnessed. Grief wants to be seen. And one of the simplest ways to honor that is to give it space to exist, give it space to be, give it space to be felt. So yes, space in your actual body, in your heart, but also you can tangibly do things to help move through this grief. So taking a photo or a candle or an item that represents what you lost, or taking a meaningful symbol to remind you of something positive that maybe you have lost. So taking a feather, a crystal, a flower, something handwritten. Take an item and let the item become a place where you can show up for your emotions. Let an item become something that helps bring the emotions out of you, that helps bring up the crying or journaling or just sitting quietly with the thoughts and processing that way. You can use that item like a portal, and every time you take the time to engage with your grief, you will heal a piece of it. Because when the grief is allowed to be seen and it's allowed to exist somewhere physically, it becomes less overwhelming everywhere else. It's kind of like looking the monster in the face, right? If you have something tangible that you identify with this grief, it's kind of like pulling it out of your body and into the world, which seems really scary at first, but actually makes it much more manageable. Other things you can do to move through grief, other tools you can use, intentional meditation. Meditation is so freaking underestimated. Meditation is its own form of therapy. So you can meditate with any intention. So you can meditate with the intention of processing and moving through grief. Just like you would do a meditation, like an inner child meditation to help process old trauma, do a meditation around your grief to help process that grief. Allow your guides to step in. Allow your higher self to step in and use that time to work the grief through your body. Obviously, things like therapy, so talk therapy, or even just speaking to loved ones, because again, grief wants a witness. It wants to be witnessed. It wants to be seen. If you resist the grief, you bury it, you don't want to talk about it, you don't want to deal with it, all that's going to do is leave that grief stuck in your body, and it will wreak absolute havoc on you because it's not meant to be stuck in your body. It's meant to be processed and relieved because it's supposed to be like a portal. It's like taking a race car and sticking it in a cage, but the engine's on and the foot's on the gas, and like you can't hold it down. It will wreak havoc. You've got to let it out. Movement, so whether it's just walking or any kind of physical movement, helps process emotions in the body, any kind of emotions. Nourishing your body with high vibrational foods, again, it's kind of like just supporting your foundational system to allow it to work properly. Rest, so much processing happens when you're resting, like whether it's dreams or, just your body kind of recalibrating in your sleep. Sleep and rest are always a time of healing. And then I've mentioned these before, but things like Reiki, that's a really big way to help move stuck energy throughout your body. Like Reiki can really help you kind of unblock some of those chakras, some of those places where energy is just kind of stuck and not being released. Any kind of energy healing, any kind of spiritual surgery, acupuncture even. The main thing is feeling and expressing the emotions behind the grief. But those are all tools that can help you in general just continue to move out energy. Like say you're processing and you're grieving, but you have all this just like leftover energy stuck in your body. All of those tools that we just discussed are ways to kind of help just like move out the remnants. Like you can't ignore the grief, ignore processing the emotions and just work out and think that that's going to process all your grief for you. You still have to face it emotionally, but physical movement and all of these other things will help just remove all the leftover remnants and kind of give you like a clean slate. Doesn't mean you'll never feel sad or that you'll never miss something that you have lost, but they'll be processed. The energy won't be stuck. So I hope this episode was helpful for you if you are someone who is working through grief now or has worked through most of your grief in the past, whatever it is. Grief has its own timeline. It doesn't care about calendars. It doesn't care about expectations. It takes time. So there could be something that happened 10 years ago that you're still grieving, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. You're not broken if you're still hurting. It's always a process, and I'm just proud of you for being here and for doing the work. And there is a very highly evolved, very strong, very wise version of you on the other side of this grief. And I just want to encourage you that you're never alone and that you're strong. And again, if you're here, I'm just proud of you for being a person who is willing to do the hard things. So that is it for this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. Again, all of the links to working with me, connecting with me, all of those things will be in the show notes. Leave a review or share this episode with someone that you think may need to hear it. And I will see you guys in the next one.